You're listening to the Talk is Jeep podcast, a discussion of everything and anything related to Jeep life. These conversations are recorded live, and the opinions stated here have not been checked for sobriety. Now, here are your hosts, Art Aldrich and Tom Chartrand.
Hello, Tom.
Hey, Art. Good morning.
Welcome to a special episode of Talk is Jeep.
We are excited about this one.
We are. This is a live podcast this morning. We don't normally do them live streaming.
No.
Not only are we live this morning on YouTube, but we have a special guest, and I'm going to bring him in now. Our special guest, Tom, is Pearse Umlauf from Jeep Jamboree USA.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Nothing better than a Sunday morning talking about Jeeps.
And we appreciate that this is early morning because you're West Coast. And so we appreciate you getting up and got your Jeep swag on, which is awesome.
Well, it's funny. I was just out before you guys. There's some, as West Coasters, we're out watching the swells and the waves coming in. So I was out this morning actually with some friends on the beach. Was down there with the Jeep and had to bundle up a little bit. It's actually a little cool this morning. So
it's
definitely cool up this way as well.
Yeah, this is top on weather in the East Coast.
Yeah. It's cool for California. I grew up in Massachusetts where 30 below zero is where I grew up plowing driveways as a kid in the dead of winter. I understood what it was like to have you couldn't feel your toes, Right. So my dad's like, look, you're going to go out and you're going to plow all the neighbors' driveways. And at that time we had a back blade to a tractor. And you learned how to drive in reverse really, really good at a young age. So.
Well, I'm hoping to get out on the beach today once we hit noontime or so. I live in Hyannis, Mass, and we love heading down to Nauset Beach and taking a drive. My wife always reminds me when it comes Jeep Jamboree time that this Jeep is really a beach Jeep and not a trail Jeep, and treat it as such.
Yeah, I think you might need two different Jeeps for that, So
exactly.
I keep telling him that, and he doesn't listen. We've been on many Jeep Jamborees ourselves. This sort of podcast and trying to get you on really started when we were looking at the new offerings for 2024, the signature trips. But even before I get into that, because I started doing a little research, and I want to just hear what's your origin story? Like, how did you get to be maybe the best job in Jeeping, I think? How did you get to be president and CEO of Jeep Jamboree USA?
Yeah, well, it started, to be honest with you, I mean, it started in high school. I was probably one of the worst students academically in high school. And my dad used to joke that I was second in my class, second from last, in terms of, I had a terrible learning disability. And my dad's philosophy, my dad was in the Army. He was an accountant. He was, he drove a good deal in terms of, do your work. And he and I were just talking this morning, actually, about this. We're talking about, what he gave me at the end of the day were a really good moral compass, integrity. If you're going to be in business, you have integrity, you have morals, you have values that you stand by, and you're honest. And at the end of the day, I'm the first person up, at 5 a.m. and I'm the last person to sleep, usually doing a couple emails. And that is the work ethic that it took me to get out of, my sisters are doctors and attorneys and they were able to be bookworms. I wasn't. And I had to be outside and do things. And when I was in high school, my dad said to me, he said, you're gonna mow lawns, essentially. You're not gonna, you're gonna earn some money. And I remember when I graduated from high school, it was 1996. I had $25,000 in the bank I had earned, but it was, I was able to go out and grind, and really I had a strong grit to me. And at that time, I had graduated high school, and I met Sue Mead, who was an automotive photojournalist. And Sue lived in our town, and she said, I need someone schlepping my bags for me. I have a gig out in Colorado to go to a thing called Camp Jeep. And so it was Camp Jeep 1996. I just graduated from high school, and I said, sure, for $100 a day, I'll lug your camera bags around for you. And at that time, I'd never really traveled much. We had traveled on the East Coast, but never been outside of the East Coast. I remember we flew into Denver, Colorado, and the TJ had just gotten launched. And so we landed in Denver, and of course I have no idea how big the mountains are because it's dark. And she goes, we have to drive to Vail, and so we drive to Vail, and it was a 4-banger. And I remember we'd hit these mountains at 80 miles an hour, and by the time you're at the top, you're in third gear in the right-hand lane, doing 40 miles an hour. And we ended up in Vail, Colorado. I remember waking up the next morning and driving from Vail down to where Camp Jeep was outside of Minturn, and seeing the sea of Jeeps. I mean, they had set the tents up and they had the off-road course, and that's where I met Mark Smith, the founder of Jeep Jamboree. He was at that point hired to build the off-road 101 courses for Camp Jeep, and she knew Mark, and so the relationship developed through Mark then, and then I ended up moving to California, against my parents' will, and started, doing everything from reading the surveys at our events. We used to, there used to be obviously manual surveys, paper surveys, and I'd read them all, and you start to understand what the business was about and what people valued and where the bumps in the road were. And I worked with Mark for years, and then it's just evolved from there. So it's a lot of hard work at the end of the day, but I truly don't believe that I feel like I actually have a real job. I've really been blessed with an opportunity that Mark was able to give me, and I take it seriously. Before Mark passed away, I said, I promised to continue your legacy, and that's every day and every year we look at this and say, I said, would Mark be proud of where we are today? And I truly believe he would, with the expansion of the program and how the program has gone. But he was a great guy, and he was a visionary for what he did. And I just hope that at the end of the day, I'm a good steward of what he created, and that's pretty much how I guide myself on a daily and weekly and yearly basis.
I will also just mention, because we had a little audio blip in the beginning, everyone should be getting audio on the stream. If you do have questions, you can type them into the comments. We'll get to them as we can, but we have got a whole bunch ourselves about some of these new things in Jeep Jamboree land. So what is really, why the signature trips? Like, why expand this into international?
The Jeep brand has been pushing international expansion for years. I think that we've had this amazing good fortune to have the Jeep brand part of our lifestyle for many years here in the United States, and a lot of the international markets don't really get it. I remember years ago, Jim Morrison came to me, who's the current president of Jeep North America, and he said, we have a group from India coming over to Moab, and would you take them out on a more challenging trail, because they don't quite understand the concept of what we're doing, And I think it's very hard to verbalize to people the things that we want to do, and what that builds is the culture. So, the background of these signature trips is we have a lot of clientele who had gone to Moab a dozen times, or been to Rubicon, been to Uray, have been all over the country. And they're also looking for other areas and other avenues to kind of have a different story to tell. And so we were approached by Thomas Brohl, who runs Jeep Experience in Germany. He approached me. We kind of connected back in 2018, 2019, right before COVID hit. And we were discussing these trips, and we were hoping to do a trip in 2020 to Iceland. And it just didn't work with the pandemic and the shutdown of everything. So we stayed in touch. Markets obviously started opening back up, and what Thomas was able to provide for us was vehicles, which is a logistical challenge. If you say to people, we're going to ship your vehicles over, the cost of the trip just goes through the roof. Right. And plus, you're without your vehicle for weeks. By the time we get it to a staging area, ship it over, make sure it gets there on time, gives us enough lag time just to ensure if there's any delays, and then you got to get it back. So he was able to provide the logistical challenge for us, which was, we'll supply vehicles for you. And then we piloted 2 trips last year. We have a small group of what we call platinum members every year, and we invited them to come and join the trip. They did. They had a great time, and it's kind of exploratory when you're doing this stuff. You don't quite know how long the days are going to be, where you're going to eat, what the meals are going to be. So they were definitely the guinea pigs for the trip. And Thomas said, I have some of the largest networks of people around the world, and I think we can expand this. And we saw the interest here with people in the United States wanting to go, but definitely there's more interest as Jeep expands the brand globally to have these platforms in other countries. And so it just seemed to work out, but it wasn't without a lot of headache getting to where we are today.
I'm certain there's some exciting trips, on deck, which is just unreal.
I'm just curious. Did you actually get to a point where you priced out what it would cost a participant to ship a Jeep out to?
We did years ago. We were looking to do a trip in Africa, and the challenge was costly then. But there's a multitude of factors, not only a cost aspect of this, but when you look at, you're also in possession of somebody's vehicle, and you become very responsible for that individual. So, there were some options that weren't egregiously expensive to ship vehicles over, but then the problem becomes if something happens to those outside of while they're in your care, it becomes a real problem. And so other countries aren't as litigious as we are. So we go over to Iceland, and consumers are really responsible for the first $1,000 of damage. That's it. So you could be off-roading and have some problematic areas, but the reality is if you have an accident with that vehicle, you're only responsible for $1,000, and then their insurance really picks up the rest. So it became logically responsible to do it this way that protected not only us as an organization but the consumer at the end of the day, because it's like it's their vehicles, something happens, you're only on the hook for XYZ. And we see our consumers at the end of the day want to go to these events, fly into Iceland, and then have the experience, but then be able to go, you know what, I'm going home. And they don't have to worry about shipping their vehicle back, and does it get stuck at a port back in the United States for inspection, and do they have some mud on their tires that they were on a farm somewhere, and now their vehicle's being held for a little while before it goes through a bio check. So there's a lot of pieces that went into this, not just cost.
Yeah, understood. That makes a lot of sense.
It really
I mean,
does, yeah.
how would you obviously we've attended regular Jeep Jamborees. How would you differentiate these trips? Because they're definitely different from what I've read than a regular Jamboree. So how would you explain the difference between a signature trip and a regular Jeep Jamboree?
Yeah, and to answer that easily is inclusions. What do we include in that event, but also the exclusivity of it. So, on top of the international trips, we're offering a number of signature trips here in the United States that kind of provide a unique experience that you wouldn't get anywhere else. If I looked at this, I called it. We're developing this year, and I was like, what would I do? I've been doing this for 25 years. What would I do if I were kind of new to this sport, or even in the sport for a while? What would be kind of cool to me that I would find interesting? Well, the things that I enjoy as I get older are smaller groups of people, but also unique experiences that I don't have the opportunity to curate on by myself. So, I just can't, as a regular off-roader, you just don't typically pick the phone and go on a wheeling trip with Fred Williams or Casey Curry or Chris Collard. And so, some of the domestic trips we put together here in the States, Fred's a good friend. I met Fred years ago, and he's just a great guy. He's an amazing fabricator. He tells a story like nobody else's business, but these abilities to connect with these people who've had some impact in the off-road industry, and to be able to just go wheel with these people. I mean, I was like, how cool would this be? So I called Casey Curry up and I said, hey, how about we do a trip on the Rubicon? And I'll do something really cool. Like whoever comes will get to bypass the group. We'll go ahead of the group for everybody else. So it's a unique experience. We'll have all of their tents set up for them so they get to camp. It's just like the ease of having their tent, their cot, their sleeping bag, pillow, flashlight, water on the pillow, the whole deal. We'll have shower tents for them. And then I said, on top of that, we'll take a Saturday and take the helicopter up to a mountaintop that we have for sundowners. And everybody can be up there for sundowners. We'll fly back into camp. And, but it also includes lodging. So a lot of these options, like with Fred and Moab, it includes all your lodging. It includes rental vehicles that are there. It includes guide teams, most of your meals. And so it's the ability to just show up. And, if you're coming from the East Coast and you're going to Moab, the number one complaint we hear from consumers on the East Coast is that if I go to Moab, it's going to take me about 3 days at a minimum to drive there, 3 days back. That's 6 days out of my work schedule that I don't have vacation time for. I'm in Moab for 3 days, so let's call it 9 days. The trip is 9 days long, and maybe a day if I have a breakdown, so let's call it 10. Well, on these trips, you can fly in on a Monday and you're flying home on a Friday, and you're there for 5 days. And so it cuts your time away from family, away from work in half. And that's what we notice with a lot of people is they just don't, there's a certain group of people that just want to be able to show up and have this experience and then be able to go home because they're working and they have lives and they can't just go, I'm retired and I can take 10 days off to do this. And at the end of the day, the best part is you don't have a broken vehicle. Sometimes you're like, oh, my vehicle broke. Well, that's on us on some of these things, so it's not your responsibility.
That's great, you listening to your customers, because last year I dragged Tom up to the Drummond Island Jeep Jamboree and we drove in my two-door JL, and the trip was right between two work jobs. So we drove, what was it, Tom, like more than 12 hours to get up to Drummond. We did it as like a 1-day drive.
We did New York to Detroit, took a nap.
Right.
And then drove up for check-in after that.
Right. Drove up, did the check-in, did the event, and then immediately on Sunday had to drive like 15 plus hours to Bethesda, Maryland to go to work. And I was like, this is about the limit of my human body able to sit in a two-door Wrangler.
It was worth all of it, but it was an effort.
But being able to go to Moab or Rubicon and not have to transport my Jeep is a great thing. And that's one of the trips that we were talking about maybe doing this year. So let me ask you a follow-up then, because this is a question that is not really defined. So I'm going to do the Moab trip, let's say. What kind of Jeep am I getting?
You're getting a JL Wrangler. So it's a newer model vehicle that's there. We actually partner with a couple different folks there, but we do partner with Twisted Jeep Rentals with Nick Oldroyd, who's there, and he's great. And so we go through and hand select the vehicles. We take the delivery of them a day ahead of time. We make sure they're in all good working, great working order. Make sure, Nick makes sure they have great tires on them, and we decal them up a little bit. So, we do our own thing with these vehicles. We also stock the vehicles with things, in the morning, like a cooler, and it has, waters and Gatorades and sodas. And then we have a snack box in each vehicle that, because one of the things, if you Jeep a lot, that it's, for some reason, it's like I eat all the time. It's like, I don't know why I'm hungry doing absolutely nothing, but it's
sitting on your butt and driving.
So I don't know what it is, but I need that jerky or some trail mix or whatever. So we make sure the vehicles are stocked with things like sunblock and bug spray and all that stuff. So we take the vehicles, so that those are the vehicles that you get. You can also bring your own vehicle to the Moab Odyssey, and we actually give you a discount. It's a $1,200 discount if you show up with your own vehicle. So you can bring your own vehicle if it's something you want to do and still get that experience. We try to make it, but like you said, for many people around the country, some of these destinations are just inaccessible because of where they are and in the inconvenience of getting there. And so the hope is that this provides an opportunity for people to, if they have that on their bucket list. I always wanted to go to Moab, but I just can't make it happen. And I don't know how to make it happen. Last year, a couple of years ago, we introduced what was called the Moab Expedition and the Rubicon Expedition, which were privately guided trips where we limited the group to like 8 or 10 vehicles. And people are like, I want to come. I just don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do Hell's Revenge or run Hell's Gate and do it safely. And so we don't know the guides out there, but here's Jeep Jamboree. They've been in the business now 70 years. We trust them. So we'll go with them. And, what I love at the end of the day is when we get to these groups together and they go on the trails. And at the end of the day or the end of the event, when people come back and they've had a great time, it is honestly what we do this for, to watch people have a smile on their face and do it safely at the end of the day. And that's where we pat ourselves on the back, is only in those moments where we go, these folks had a really good time. That's why we're here, period. That's it,
Absolutely. And I've observed just in the last few years, it's gone from being more hardcore Jeep to, yes, hardcore, your own built up Jeep, but also very family friendly, beginners. It really is so well done on every level of Jeeper.
Well, it's odd. We have a very interesting change in this industry, which is, 30, 40s are the new 37, right? I mean, I remember when I started this, we were like, we were talking about this the other day with Sean and Ty. We were sitting up going, remember when we put 33s on a Jeep and we were like, oh my God, these things are huge. And, now they're showing up with 33s from the factory. So a lot has changed. But, it's interesting. 25 years ago, the person on 40s is not the person on 40s today. It's a very different demographic, because that vehicle on 40s is worth about $100,000. It's not some beat up old vehicle that's on super swampers, anymore.
Right.
So it's a different demographic. But the biggest change that we saw in getting families out, we just ran some numbers the other day. I think we have 1,000 kids that came to the Jamboree program in 2023. And the biggest change was the four-door Wrangler. It really was. We literally had people calling us before the four-door Wrangler came out. We had people calling us going, it had been participants for years saying, unfortunately, we can no longer come to your events. And we're like, oh, sorry, and they're like, no, we're having a family and it's no longer a family vehicle. And these people, because we're selling the vehicle, we're buying a four-door, whatever it is. And it was years later, they would call us back and say, hey, we're coming back. And we're like, well, what changed? Well, we bought a four-door. We're coming out with the whole family. The four-door Wrangler literally changed the topography. Sorry, not the topography, the trajectory of this industry in terms of getting families out off-roading. Was probably the single most important thing to really re-engage families. And it's amazing. And, we see the majority of vehicles now at Jamborees are four-door Wranglers.
Right.
Some people love them
struggle
because of the
with
wheelbase.
this. I
You struggle with this?
this.
Yeah, as a two-door guy.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just my personal thing, but I look at a Jeep and I'm like, two-door is a Jeep. A four-door is like a roller coaster ride. I don't know. Just
A four-door is a Grand Cherokee.
But you see them all over. And
Yeah.
like when I do the Catskill Mountain Jeep Jamboree, which is really narrow, most of the trails are narrow. These four doors are just like way out of place.
Oh, there's no doubt. Catskills is one of those, a two-door definitely benefits you. Those are some, I always say to Mike Taylor, I'm like, can you please just nip a couple of those trees out of there? Because I mean, people come out of there. It's like that's a tough one. It's funny. That's where Catskills humbled me years ago, because you're on Rubicon knocking the big boulders out, and you're in Moab, and then you get to Catskills and it rains, and the smallest rocks are wet like this, and you could be fully locked up and you're not going anywhere. It's absolutely crazy with a little mud on your tires. But yeah, there's no doubt that some of the maneuverability inside the trees at some of these East Coast Jamborees where you're in the woods, a two-door is not a bad thing to have.
Right.
Speaking of the East Coast Jamboree, this was something that Tom and I have participated in before. But what's going on with Killington? Because it's not available this year.
Yeah, Killington's a tough one. With the rains that you guys had last year on the East Coast, it devastated a lot of the trails out on Killington. But more importantly, it was the county roads leading up to the trails that the county just literally said, we don't know when they're going to open again. And, the hardest thing we have, the hardest decision we make all the time is, a lot of times we hedge a bet, right? We say, look, we're going to do this event. And in talking with the people that are supporting the event, whether or not this is going to happen, you can tell if somebody's trustworthy, or you can tell if they're good to their word. But you get to some of these local townships and they just go, yeah, we don't know when. And I have a hard time with that, just personally, because I'm like, what do you mean you don't know when? Like, we built the Empire State Building in 417 days. You can't figure out how to get a grader on a road and make this work, It's like, it blows my mind how, anyway, regardless of that, the reality is, what I don't want to do is, we never want to put together an event that we don't think we can actually do, because what I can't stand doing is people take time away from their jobs, their families, or whatever. They plan vacations, and then we go, oops, sorry. We knew this was potentially an issue, And thanks for planning and taking your time. We look like a bunch of jerks at the end of the day if we do that. So when we plan events, we want to make sure that it's something we can actually fulfill the promise. So I'm making a promise to you that we're going to do this. And so you come and you pay some good money, you give us your money, and you entrust us that we're going to do something. And so for Killington, the county roads, they kind of shrugged their shoulders and said, yeah, we don't quite know when they're going to open. We can't guarantee any dates. And we're like, well, I can't tell consumers to sign up for something that I can't guarantee at the end of the day, or at least guarantee with a really good probability that it's going to happen. And that's where that stood. So unfortunately, Killington's out for 2024. So, and we don't know if it's going to be back.
Oh, I was going to say, so you don't feel confident about it maybe not coming back in 25?
I don't. It really depends on these townships. Some of them are really pro Jamboree or pro events, and some are, we don't want to see any growth. And so it just depends. What we're doing in the interim, though, is we've scouted some land up north, way north, like on the Canadian border in New York, and it's a couple thousand acres, I believe, up there. And our team has been up there twice. Including some of the Killington trail guides, and they so far the team has given me a thumbs up that for 2025 this is going to be a great location. So we're already in the works to see what we could do to put together, because the East Coast, what I love about events on the East Coast, and I grew up there, is they don't have access to wheeling like we do out in the West. We go out west, we're like, I'm going to go to Arizona or Nevada or California. There's millions of acres of land that we can go wheel on. Back east, that isn't the case. So when we get to do these events on private land, it opens up areas for people to actually see what their vehicle is capable of doing, and they can, so it's important to us. So we're obviously continuing to invest in that area, and hopefully we'll have a really cool offering there in 2025.
That's awesome. Encouraging.
So the Moab event where you're providing a Jeep, or any of the trips where you're providing a Jeep, like what happens? Let's say I roll it over. What happens? What happens there? Is there liability?
Well, the way you drive, Art, yeah, I could see that.
Well, yeah. The first thing we do is we get out and we shoot you. No, kidding. No,
not the first time that's happened.
It's right. No, in Iceland or the overseas trips, again, the fee is $1,000. You're on the hook for $1,000, and then the insurance companies take over after that fact. And I assume you're asking from what happens to the vehicle. What am I responsible for? Right.
Right.
Yeah, so I think there's two parts to that question. One is what happens to the individual, in terms of bodily injury, and then we have one which happens to the vehicle. The vehicle in overseas is you're responsible for $1,000. We rent the vehicles with Nick Oldroyd in Moab. We actually take out additional insurance policies on those vehicles as well, and then we add them to our insurance policies for the period of time of the events as well. So we make sure we try to insure ourselves through the teeth should something happen. We also recognize, as most people do, and Nick understands, there's certain little damages to vehicles that are just necessary or inherent to what we're doing. So a scuff on the wheel, a scratch on the bumper, Nick's not coming back to me going, hey, there's a scratch on the bumper. It's but
right.
If you're doing some significant damage that's there. But we also have really comprehensive safety protocols in place at all these events. People will come to us and say, well, why am I paying so much money? Well, we're doing it in our insurance is not cheap. I think we're paying close to $250,000 a year in insurance just to protect our guides in the field around the country. If something happens and they get sued, but we also have overseas. We for the overseas trips, we actually are getting a separate policy, which actually it covers emergency evacuation insurance for a lot of consumers, because you're in the middle of nowhere. We need to know what these policies are. We need to know what's included for these folks, so we can get them out of an area that's more remote. But our teams in many areas, like in Moab, will carry satellite phones with them, and to make sure we know the protocols to call the Grand County, search and rescue, and how do we do that? So it's not like people always used to judge us many years ago, saying, well, I can go out and rent a guide. And we go, oh, I totally get that. Are your guides AED, CPR, and first aid certified? Do they carry AEDs with them and oxygen? Do they carry satellite phones? Are they ready to respond in a manner that is necessary should you need it? And the answer in most cases is no. And so we take a lot of pride in ensuring that our consumers are as safe as they can be. People always ask me, well, how do you judge a good event? And I say, we didn't kill or injure anybody. And that's the truth of the matter, is that's how we judge it first off. And then did you have a good time? Because we probably see 20, 25 rollovers a year with 13,000 consumers coming through the programs, this and the Academy program every year. And, they're serious and we take them seriously. And it's always a concern of ours at the end of the day. We want to make sure people are safe. And so, that comes with some extra regulations, unfortunately, and some extra costs that are involved in that, trainings, et cetera. But the hope is that people have a level of comfort when they come out with us, knowing that they're taken care of.
One other thing in that vein is there a different vetting process for some of these events where people are coming in and renting a Jeep from you or having someone else's Jeep that may not have experience in a Wrangler or on trails?
It's good question. It's probably the biggest challenge we have. Years ago, we would have what we call the vehicle evaluation form. So you'd show up
Right.
and we'd say, "Oh, look, Tom's vehicle, he can go on whatever trail he wants." And then we recognize that, you just bought the vehicle from somebody else.
Right.
And, while the vehicle is fully capable of it, the driver isn't. So, what we've created over the years and how we've adapted that is, you kind of have an evaluation of the vehicle, but there's also what's called a participant profile. And it's, if you show up and you have 39-inch tires and we say, "How many trips have you been on, Tom?" And you say, "Well, this is my first one." All right. Well, the instruction to the guides is, let's take them down a notch, because,
Yeah.
and I always say this to everybody, it's much easier for me to respond to you as a consumer. So you go to one of the events and you have a vehicle that's capable of tackling something that's more challenging, and we put you on an easier trail or an intermediate trail, and you're unhappy with that experience. Well, it's much easier for me to make a phone call to you and say, "Hey, Tom, I'm so sorry you had a poor experience at this event. Why don't you come back next time on us? Or, I'll give you 50% on your next Jamboree to come back." It's much easier to win you over at that point when you've been upset that you didn't get the experience you want. Let me give you the experience you want then. It's more challenging when I pick up the phone and I say, "Tom, I'm so sorry you broke your leg, and you rolled your vehicle over. What can I do to help you?" And so those conversations are very, very different and have limited opportunities over here to fix what you rolling your vehicle over, as opposed to just inviting you back and giving you a different experience. So, it is a challenge because you have vehicles now that are like, we'll take a stock Wrangler and Gladiator through the Rubicon, but it doesn't mean that the driver is capable of doing that,
Right.
And so it's the biggest issue we have with mirroring somebody's capabilities with the appropriate trail. And sometimes you mess up.
One thing that's always, and I heard you talk about this on a previous podcast, that you have the capability sometimes to take in more Jeeps than you do, but you limit it because you want a better experience for the participants, which is totally respectful. But how limited are some of these new trips, the signature trips in particular? Like, how many Jeeps are we talking about? Are we talking about 5, 10, 20?
Yeah, I think it's average of 10. I think the Casey Curry experience is 8 vehicles. The Moab Odyssey with Fred Williams is 10. I think the Immigrant Trail adventure with Chris Collard is 10. And then you get overseas, and I think it's 14 people total. I think it's 7 vehicles on those overseas trips. So
That's
they are
pretty
small.
intimate.
Now,
That's nice.
yeah, it's great. Well, it gives us the flexibility to make changes along the way. A lot of those trips, because you're so remote, you have a less accessibility to services. So sometimes we're making changes on the fly, and it's much easier to do that with 7 vehicles than it is 20. But some of the other ones, I think the Death Valley trip is 20 vehicles, so it's a little larger. And I think we're doing a Winter Drummond Island Jamboree this year as well, and that's 30. So there is some flexibility to those, but these kind of more private, exclusive trips, these opportunities, in order to get that, we need smaller groups. We can't go into some of these bigger areas and have that. Like we do 2 trips on the Rubicon called the Rubicon Trail Expeditions. And this year we're doing a Rubicon Trail Expedition and a Rubicon Trail Expedition Extreme. And they were essentially private guided trips where you can come out, again, it's 10 vehicles only. But the Expedition Extreme, we run the trail in reverse, which is it's much more challenging. If you haven't done it in reverse, it is not as easy. When you're going up through property lines, Sawtooth, and Big Sluice, going up that hill, it's way different than having gravity help you down that portion of the trail. So it's but we want these experiences to be a little unique, and we want these people to have the personal attention that is out there that we're promising them at the end of the day. So
Like the Alps trip. I love the idea of this Alps trip. I've never been to the French Alps or the Italian Alps. Love the whole idea of it. So two questions here. So this trip, is it basically expected that I'm coming with a second? So I'm basically buying it for two people. Is that the expectation?
yeah, it is. Unfortunately, a lot of the overseas trips were limited on where we can stay for the size of the group and how many people we can put in the vehicles. And so, we've had a couple people reach out to us and say, we want to bring our child with us. And so we've had to work out some unique. We'll kind of customize that for people who want that. But the reality is, when you're going over these trips, you're sharing a room. And particularly in Iceland, we're in some of these remote areas where we are taking all of the rooms they have in these little inns. And so if you and Tom are going together, you're sharing a room. We can have the beds split, as most European hotels can do, but there's not a lot of options for single supplements out there. So, and how we price the trip, our vendors over there are coming to us saying, look, for us to run 7 vehicles and have a staff and everything we're doing, it's XYZ, here's the price. And we have to break that up amongst, it's say, well, we have 7 vehicles. How are we going to break this up per person? Unfortunately, at the end of the day, it's simple math. Trip's going to cost you $100,000. How many? You have 14 people. Right. This is what it's going to be per person. And the other thing is, I don't know about you guys, you offer it enough, but I don't want to go to Iceland and sit in the back seat. I at least want to be in the front. So we kind of make it 2 people per Jeep as well, is how we like it. And the trips we experienced last year with our Platinum Club members, they loved it because you had 5 days of just driving everywhere. And so people could switch off and on from driver to passenger. But you're not summoned to the back seat, which is, to me, is not the experience I want, I want to give somebody. I mean, if somebody came to me at the end of the day and said, I'll pay whatever, we can make that work. But we design the trips for the best experience for the consumer.
Specifically about the Alps trip, is that you're not driving a Wrangler.
They're split. Yeah, you have. I think in the Alps you're half Wrangler, half Trailhawk Compass, and the group will split. So every day, because it's 4 and 4, I think of 4 Wranglers and 4 Compasses. Okay. It's accessibility to vehicles. So you'll have one day you're in a Compass and one day you're in a Wrangler, and they'll switch off and on. So you'll actually exchange vehicles. So yeah, we wouldn't want to stick somebody to that. But I have to be honest with you, the trails and a lot of these areas we're going to, and particularly in the Alps, it's not hard off-roading. It's more of a journey through the Alps. A lot of these roads were old World War II roads, and so they've been maintained also by the local authorities very well. They're groomed roads, so you're getting the opportunity to drive in areas that most people don't get to drive. However, they're not technically challenging. Okay. Even Iceland, not technically challenging, but when you do the ones in the winter, and we drive over some of the glaciers, they're running 30 and 37 and 40-inch tires. So we do require the Wranglers for the Iceland trips up there. But even the Azores, I think it's a mix of vehicles that are over there. People have the opportunity to exchange the vehicles. We will make it mandatory that when they get there, and before they go, they understand exactly what is in store for them and how they'll be kind of exchanging, Wrangler one day, Compass the next. And I have to be honest with you, if you've ever wheeled in a Compass, it's pretty cool. Really when you're on roads like that, it's a little more comfortable at the end of the day. But we were able to launch the Compass for Jeep in an off-road environment and do some pretty crazy things with it. And it's a fun little vehicle to drive. And particularly in Europe, when you're on some roads that are smaller, as if anybody's traveled to Europe before, the smaller vehicles are definitely what they use to get around with. Wrangler's a big vehicle for them over there. So
that's true. I know that in most of the Jeep Jamborees, you're behind the wheel most of the day. The signature trips, it seems that's not exactly the itinerary.
Well, you're behind the wheel most of the day on all these trips. You're going to be behind the wheel. It just is, depends on the level of comfort. The Moab Odyssey trip with Fred, you're staying at really nice lodges every night. So you're at the Hoodoo Lodge for 2 nights in downtown Moab, and then we're going to stay at the new Ulum Resort, which is this 5-star glamping experience. It's 30 minutes. It's south of Moab. It's beautiful. And then you come back to Ulum on the last night. So So you're still behind the wheel the majority of the day. We took these again. We want to take into some cultural aspects a little bit, right? So when you come to Moab and you're wheeling with Fred, the whole idea is, Fred's like, he sent me a note the other day when I posted something on Instagram about having coffee with Fred. He's like, let's not forget about square donuts as well. Like so the whole experience is we want to bring them to Moab, who people haven't been there, and show them what Moab is about. It's just not the off-roading. It's also about the community of people, the community of Jeep people, community about off-road community. You want to go to Moab. So, we're having dinner in town. You're going to the Moab garage for breakfast in the morning. It's all these little nuances that make the experience. When I go to Moab, every time I go now, how many times can I do Metal Masher? But it's like, oh, I'm going to get coffee and a breakfast sandwich at Moab Garage. I'm going to the Dough Bin later, or the Dough Bird, I think it was, to get a donut, And so it's like, they become highlights of your journey. It's not just about off-roading. It's about, it's about getting to know the people of your group. It's about being part of the community. It's about sharing in experiences that you wouldn't have otherwise. And so much of those experiences are not necessarily in the vehicle. It's cultural, and it's the area you're going. You want to see it.
I like how you highlight that it's a cultural experience. It is more than just a trail ride, which sometimes is perfect, but this gets you a little bit deeper into some of those areas you may have dreamed of always going to. So that's cool to hear.
Yeah.
I've benefited and been hurt both ways with the cancellation policy. Most of the time it's my own fault with work conflicts and things like that. I'm just curious because the international trips are obviously a much bigger financial hit and also logistically more challenging for the traveler even. Is there any variation or anything different about the cancellation policy for the international trips?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, actually. So they are very expensive, and so people have to put a deposit down. It's non-refundable. Now, what we're telling people, and we did this last year actually, is that we're saying, look, when you commit to this trip, we're committing on your behalf as well. So we're on the hook as well. This is if you're telling me that you're going in, it's funny. People ask us all the time. Some people get mad about our cancellation policy. And I'm like, here's the problem. You come to me and you say, hey, I want this really cool experience. So I go, okay, we're going to deliver on our promise, which is I'm going to get you your hotel room. I'm going to secure your meals. I'm going to secure your vehicle. I'm going to secure all this stuff for you because you tell me that you're coming. And then at the last minute, you go, well, I can't go for some reason. And we go, oh, that's okay. You just owe us the money that we invested in making sure that we delivered on our promise to you. Because if you showed up in Iceland or Moab or whatever, and I said, oh, I'm so sorry, Art, I didn't have the meal scheduled for you. And the vehicle I told you I would get, the last minute, I was able to get you this old CJ, on the track. I know it's not the JL. You are saying to me, look, I want this experience that you are advertising. And in order for me to give you that experience, I have to invest the money ahead of time, many times before we collect the fee from you, to ensure that we procure those deliverables, and then when you cancel, like, I'm on the hook. I already told these vendors that we're coming, so, I don't know what to tell you at the end of the day, but what's different about the international trips is that it's kind of a full commitment. When you go, you're committing to fully. However, if we can find someone to replace you, we will give you a full refund. So last year we did the same thing, and we offered this trip to our platinum members. We had 18 people on a wait list to go on the trip, and we had 2 platinum members very close to the date. One gentleman had a health issue that he was diagnosed with, and somebody else couldn't go. We found a replacement for them, and we gave them 100% of their money back. So the commitment we're trying to make, because we're not in the business to take your money just for shits and giggles at the end of the day. It's not what we're trying to do, but we are trying to deliver on the promise that you are entrusting us to ensure we deliver on at the end of the day. And unfortunately, that costs money to commit to it, and it's a risk that everybody takes. However, the last thing I want to do is have somebody be out $20,000 to go to Iceland and not go and then waste that money. So we will do everything in our power possible to get that money back, whether it's we get it through the vendors, but the goal is this year that we will call everybody who sign up early and say, look, when you make that second commitment, you're in, so there's no gray area in what we're asking of them. So when they have to cancel, they understand the risks, but then we will try to ensure we fill their spot. And if we can fill their spot, or if they can fill the spot for themselves, I got a buddy who wants to go. I don't care how you do it. We'll give you all your money back if we can fill that spot for you. And so that's the hope at the end of the day with the signature trips.
So it's still reasonable, like that if you're on a wait list, I mean, it's conceivable you could get a call at the last minute, though that would be a little hairy, but it's conceivable
Yeah.
that could happen.
Oh, we call people, we always tell people get on the wait lists. We'll clear wait lists sometimes. I mean, I've had a wait list before there's 200 people on them and the guy at the bottom makes it because everybody else has plans,
Wow.
and he's
Yeah.
on the wait list. He's like, oh, I can't believe I got in.
That's
So-
how I got into my first jamboree. It was 2019. I had tried to get into Killington, couldn't get in, waitlisted. And like the week before, I get a call saying, hey, not a call, but an email saying, hey, there's a spot open. And I was able to jump in and get it. I wasn't really prepared. My Jeep was stock at that point, and it survived. And that was like, then I was addicted to the.
It was a good trial run.
That's good. Yeah. No, we try our best to people have changes all the time, but it is, being in we are in the travel industry, essentially. People were procuring travel for that. And it's crazy though. It's, unfortunately you also see the backside of that, which is how many people are disingenuous with the reason why they need to cancel, either they don't want to go or whatever it is.
Right.
It was amazing how many people died every week. We'd get these, oh, my so-and-so died. And so we finally said, that's fine. Just give us a death certificate. And that went down to about a tenth of what was actually happening. So, we try to be very understanding to people, but we're going out of our way to ensure, like I said, that we're providing an experience to you. You're coming to us saying, we want this experience. We're saying, okay, we're going to deliver on our promise. And in order to do that means we invest a lot of time and a lot of energy into this. And then when you can't go, sometimes we're on the hook for those costs. It's not that we're just sitting there going, oh God, Tom didn't come. Boy, let me count that money. It's like, I'm sorry, that money's out the door. Half the time I feel like Western Union, the money goes by us. And if we're lucky, if we get a buck, it goes right to the vendor. So
I was also just thinking back, we're talking about the Moab, because I really want to do the Moab trip myself. But you said, I think it was 10 vehicles, but is that 10 plus some people if they want to bring their own, or is it 10 total?
10 total.
So even if you want to bring your
participants.
own. Yeah. If you want to bring your own, it's part of the count. So it's 10 total vehicles. That's it. Yeah. We want to keep it really, again, I want the experience for people to have where they get to hang with Fred, and we'll have a really great guide team there. So Fred's kind of the host, right? And then we have a guide team from our office, our office in Georgetown. We'll drive out with support vehicles. We'll have all the support guys. Some of the top guides in the country will be there. And for us, what makes a good guide is not just somebody who can bring you up an obstacle and do it safely, but they also engage really well with the consumer. So by the end of the experience, you feel like you're all friends, and these are guides that can communicate well, they can joke well, because part of the whole thing is when you're off-road, it's all about the banter at the end of the day,
On
it's
the two-way,
yeah. And Tom runs into a rock, and the whole next week we're joking him about the rock. He gets a rock sitting in his.
Did you see that one?
He did hit
see
that,
rock.
I guess.
Yeah, I
Can I
didn't
send you
see
the
that,
bill
but,
for my tie rod? Yeah.
Right. No, but that's what it's about. And then every morning someone comes out and there's a rock sitting on their Jeep or whatever. It's like, but it's that fun banter that happens. We always say to people that they come to jamborees thinking that they're coming for an off-roading experience, and they do, but it's not why they come back. It's the reason why they come back is they've met other people, they've developed relationships, and they have fun on these trails. And yes, it's a bit of conquering and doing things that you wouldn't normally do, but for me, the experience has always been about, I'm going to go and see, Ty and Sean and, and Jim and all these, and we're going to go hang out, have a really great time for 2 days, getting to areas that people typically don't get to go to. But it's really about the camaraderie at the end of the day. It is that community we talk about. It's the reason why we wave to each other. It's the reason, I always say that outdoors people we navigate on a compass that's a north, east, south, and west, and that's how we navigate. We go to Onyx off-road or whatever it is, but we navigate our lives with a moral compass that is very similar, and I think that's what connects us. When I see someone broken on the side of the road, or someone having vehicle trouble, or they need a jump start in their car or something, it's that ability to say, I'm going to stop and see what's going on. It looks like they might need a hand. They're changing their tire. Maybe they could use a hand. I got an impact wrench in the back. It's going to make it a lot easier, right? What can I provide? And so I think a lot of that philosophy for me, that goes back even to Mark, who started this company. Mark was like, I will give you the shirt off my back as long as you deserve it. I think Mark Vaughn described Mark as, when he died, he wrote an article. He said, Mark Smith was the guy who would either greet you with a handshake or a punch in the face, depending on what you deserved. And that was Mark at the end of the day. And, Mark would literally give things away if he thought people saw value in them. And I mean, Mark would buy these things all around the country and all around the world. He'd come back with things that he brought back from the Amazon or the Papua New Guinea, or driving through Nevada. And he had an antique store in Georgetown, and people would walk in, or he'd see it in the office, and somebody would walk in and go, God, I've always wanted one of those things, but could never afford it. And 6 months later, that thing's sitting there, and Mark's going, I decided to give that to so-and-so. He really liked it,
Wow.
and that was the kind of guy he was. And I think that when I look at Mark, and I look at what he created in 1953 with the Jeep Jamboree program, and where we are today, it's very much the Jeep culture. It is, what? You got a broken part? I got one in my back of my Jeep. Just have it. It's that attitude that I think runs this community. It is the backbone of this community. It is, you need, like I was down here in San Diego, and one day I'm getting on the freeway, and I see this line of Jeeps going down, and I'm like, where the heck are they going? And so I jump in the back of this line, and I follow them to the Del Mar Fairgrounds, and it happened to be the San Diego Jeep Club was running a big Toys for Tots run, and they, I think brought in 1,200 toys and raised $21,000 that year. But that is across the country. We see that with these groups doing fundraisers, and just they're doing good. And if you took all of that goodness and you kind of told the story, we're a pretty cool group of people, men and women who are out there doing extraordinary things for people, whether it's taking people, there's a gentleman who takes a group in every year to Rubicon who's disabled sports, the kids, they take them in there. And it's like, I don't know, there's again, that moral compass that I don't think a lot of other people subscribe to, but we all do. And thank God we do. We found this clan of all of us, and we get together and kind of celebrate that by doing extraordinary things. And that's really what makes us, at the end of the day, it sets us apart from everybody else.
It's a great
Very well said. Very well said. Have you ever thought about doing a jamboree that kind of retraces that Mark Smith trip from South America? Like, has there ever been, like, I would be first on the list for that.
Yeah, I think we've considered it we've considered it a number of times, and you're probably right. We probably should
Oh my God,
point do
please,
that. That would be. I'm going to write
do
that down. I'm going to give you the credit for that one. All right. I think that would be a fun one. It would be, I know that Sean and Ty on our team had retraced a lot of the steps through South America. And obviously the part that is the challenge is the Darien, and you'd have to probably skip that part. It's too politically challenging at this point, and dangerous to drive through there. I think that when we've always done it, that was, when you think about it, it is still, I think, the longest overland journey in history, continuous journey. Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman did the long way around, but they jumped the flight from Russia to Alaska. I think that was 24,000 miles, but it wasn't continuous. Mark's journey was continuous, and the stories he tells about that are just hysterical. A lot of the stories that I don't think are in his book either, like they get to Prudhoe Bay, Alaska on that last trip, and ExxonMobil owned the property up to Prudhoe Bay, and Mark loved being a little bit of a rebel, in this stuff. And he gets up there, and ExxonMobil will not let him on their property. They're like, "Sorry, you can't finish this. Too bad. It's our property. We won't allow you on it." And Mark happens to be in a coffee shop, and they're just like in this coffee shop figuring out what they're going to do. And this guy overhears them. And he goes, "What are you trying to do?" And they go, "We're trying to get up to Prudhoe Bay." And the guy goes, "I have a mining claim up there." He goes, "Get some picks and shovels and let's go up and we'll go to the mining claim." So they go to a local hardware store, they buy some picks and shovels, and they get in their Jeeps and they drive to Prudhoe Bay. And ExxonMobil hears about this and is furious. And Irene Smith, his wife, gets a phone call the next day going, "We heard your husband's been arrested up in Alaska." And she's like, "Well, that's not true. I just talked to him, you know." And ExxonMobil was furious that he had found a loophole to get through this thing after they told him no. But Mark was somebody who just never listened to authority that well. He was always like,
That
"I'm
was the
sorry, but
punch.
this is how we're going," Yeah. So, but Mark's tenacity in not saying no is the reason why we have trails like the Rubicon open today.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mark was a huge advocate for public lands should be open to the public, not just a select few. And when you look at the stories of Mark fighting to keep the Rubicon open, I mean, it was like the Wild West back then. I mean, there are stories of Mark landing the helicopter in front of a U.S. Forest Service's agent's truck and then chasing him around his truck, threatening to kick the shit out of him. And the officer going, "Look, you're threatening. You can't threaten me. I'm a federal officer." And Mark's going, "I'm not threatening you. I'm promising you." It's like he was. But I mean, Mark has always fought to keep land open. That's why we keep the Arch Canyon Jamboree going to this day. It's because we have been, the SUA has fought for years to shut us out of there. And, we have ensured that we exercise our rights for an RS 2477 route down there to ensure that we maintain our rights as an organization to run trails on public land. The trails have been spiked down there on us. There have been protesters out there, and we continue to do it just to exercise our rights for this community to ensure that that trails stay open. So,
Tom, I have one more question, but Tom, do you have anything before we wrap it up with Mark?
I don't think so. Not at the moment.
Pearse?
I've asked pretty much everything I wanted to know.
So, Pearse, this is the last question for me. Is there any place where you want to have a jamboree, but you have not been able to do one?
That's a good question. I can tell you that where I would like to bring one back is Massachusetts. If we could bring it back, we used to have an old jamboree there called the Mohawk Trail Jeep Jamboree.
Yep.
And it was a favorite of everybody's. And again, you talk about Mark's goodwill as a human being. There was the Charlemont Inn, was where we had it. And those folks were always hard up on cash. And they would always ask Mark to extend the full amount of his money way up in advance so they could get the preparations and get the building prepared. And Mark would give them the money up front. I'm like, "You're absolutely insane. Why are you doing this?" But he believed in people, but that jamboree was a real special one. And I grew up back in Massachusetts, and not because of that, but it was again the fight with the local communities about not wanting us on public land. It was, really saying, "Oh, you Jeep people or whatever," and it wasn't the case. So I'd love to bring one back to Massachusetts at some point. It was one of Mark's favorites as well. Mohawk Trail was just one of his favorite places to go. So yeah,
I love it.
there's not a perfect state, but that's one area I would love to bring back in the future if we could, for nostalgic reasons.
We had a couple of comments come in that we mostly hit upon. But I think this is Mike Harris wants to know, how about a Jeep Jamboree in Ontario, Canada?
Yeah, years ago, Jeep Jamboree Canada was run by a guy with Ron Baker, and we helped them get that whole program off the ground. We'd love to do things across the border. Every time we go across the border, though, our insurance goes up about $10,000, so it becomes a little pricey to do. But it's one of the expansion areas that we'd like to get into is Canada more. We know they have the trails, we know they have the network, they know they have the Jeep clubs. So it's definitely in our future scope. It's whether or not we can have the challenge for us as people go, "Why do you have a jamboree here?" Well, we don't have somebody who can really help us run it. This program is not doable without the 700 trail guides we have in the field throughout the United States. It is simply not doable. If you think about it, and I call the trail guides and tell them this, nobody walks into our office and registers for an event. It's all done online. And so, the first faces that people meet at jamborees are trail guides. These are people who are local to the communities, who really see the vested interest in having these events in their area and want to steward new people into this sport. But literally, they're the faces of this organization. And the reason why we don't do it in a lot of areas is we don't believe that we have great teams in there. So if we can't figure out a good guide team and a nice local coordinator who can help us kind of, with the local communities and the local agencies that are there, we can't just go slap one in there, because we don't have the support network to support it. And the number one key, it's like we can find a tent, we can find a caterer. That's not a problem. It's ensuring that we have a guide team there that knows the trails, that knows the area, that is connected to the local community. And that's what it really takes for us to do an event. And if we don't have those pieces in place, we don't do it.
Well, Pearse, this has been very informative. I think it answered all of my questions about the new trips, and I think a lot of people probably had some of the same questions that we did. So hopefully they find it useful as well.
I think it gave some fresh perspective, and just thank you for your time.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I appreciate you guys getting up on a Sunday and having me on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this has been great, and maybe we'll see you at a Jamboree in 24.
Yeah, I expect to see you in Moab. I guess you're coming, right?
I'm gonna be clicking on the button. Clicking on the button. All right, thank you.
Well, guys, thanks again so much for your time. Appreciate it. Take care.
We'll see you.
Take care, Pearse. Thank you.
All right, bye.
Well, Tom, that was pretty interesting.
That was some fascinating stuff. I'm looking forward to a Jamboree in 24. We missed it in 23, and I'm looking forward to one or two.
Did it change your opinion on any of the trips after
I think so.
Pearse?
Absolutely. I mean, number one, it got me excited about the community. And secondly, some of those international trips where we're like, oh, it's just going to be in a Compass or something else like that. They want to get you behind the wheel of the Jeep you want. So knowing that things are going to switch around and then getting that excitement behind the cultural experience of it all, I thought it was great.
Yeah, me too. All right. Well, we will TBD our thoughts probably for another episode soon on Talk is Jeep. So for now, I'm Art.
I'm Tom. Thanks for being here.
We'll see you next time.